Et je travaille beaucoup avec les banques, les différentes banques dans l'Afrique centrale et l'Afrique de l'Ouest. J'ai aussi fait mes études approfondies dans la digitalisation, où j'ai fait ma thèse doctorat sur la digitalisation des banques de l'Afrique centrale et l'Afrique de l'Ouest. Et j'ai publié aussi des articles sur la digitalisation et la transformation digitale et l'inclusion financière. Donc je suis très ravi d'être ici pour partager un peu ce que j'ai vécu comme expérience dans mon travail et aussi les recherches que j'ai amenées aussi dans le domaine. Mais par contre, je serai un peu différent de tous les autres intervenants précédents parce que le sujet, c'est African Banking Forum. Ce n'est pas Forum bancaire d'Afrique. Donc ma présentation serait en anglais et j'espère que ce sera bon pour nous. Et bien sûr, je peux prendre les questions en français autour. D'ailleurs, j'ai déjà reçu beaucoup de questions sur la plateforme autour de ce qui est la réglementation de cloud. Je pense que c'est un sujet que j'ai entendu beaucoup parler ici et c'est vraiment un débat qu'il faut aborder pour voir comment vraiment transformer pour être une banque digitale dans la manière le plus simple et moins coûteux que possible. Je pense qu'il y a une possibilité, il y a des débats à faire autour de ce qui est du cloud. J'ai préparé des slides, je pense que tu pouvais lancer. Bon, je vais approcher ici. So maybe I switch to English, and I believe it's okay for the audience. If you have any questions in French, I'll be happy to take them. So like I said, I've put together a few slides that summarizes what I see as perspective towards cloud banking. In my slides, I've looked a little bit about the African banking landscape, what disruption is all about, the cost of providing IT, and of course, the cloud deployment model, the service, the case for banking, and the various considerations. Why do you want to grow to cloud? What must you take into consideration, and so on? Network availability, security, regulation, and what you have. And of course, some few use cases. So when we look at the, next slide please, when we look at the African banking landscape, we see that it's a landscape that is quite dense and competitive. We have so many, I would say, banks, both multinationals and local and national banks, that are playing into the African financial services landscape. But when we do a comparative analysis between what obtains in Africa and what exists in the world, we see that we're still far down the chain because of the level of maturity that we have in our sector for one reason or the other. But that does not mean that the future looks gloomy for us. There is still much to do, but we need to find the right way to transform and try to compete with all the international banks that are key players in the industry. In Africa, for instance, we have over 774 banks operating, running over 245 million accounts, and for a population of about 1.3 billion, as you know, today, projected to reach 2.4 billion by 2050. And therefore, when you take a comparative analysis between the population, the number of accounts, the players, you see clearly that there is room for a lot to be done. But how do we get that done? We need to find the right, I would say, cost-effective, agile method to be able to address this large opportunity that is there. And we believe that if a full consideration is done and the right choice is made, cloud computing gives one of the opportunity that banks or financial services providers can easily leverage on to be able to leapfrog to the next level in terms of digital transformation in Africa. Next slide, please. We have all heard about MNOs in all the presentations that have been done here. I happen to work for a telco company, and we've transformed our business model so rapidly to start eating into the breakfast and lunch of banks. I believe a lot of banks are very, I would say, not very comfortable with the dynamic change from the telco operator, but it is because telco operators identify that niche, that need, a lot of people, young people who need services, and they have the network, they have the know-how. They decided to take the opportunity to satisfy a need. But that doesn't mean that banks should sit and complain. They have to learn from what telcos have done, either by studying the business model how the IT services are designed, how is it deployed, how is it supported, and either leverage that experience or partner with telco company to fulfill the large need that is out there in the market. Next slide, please. So when we look at Africa also, we talked about fintech. Yes, there's a lot of fintech players in the market. And the question we need to ask ourselves is, why are these fintech players coming up and which needs are they fulfilling? In Africa, we talk about 300 fintech companies. Suddenly, about 132 of them playing in the payment and the lending industry. So this is a traditional industries that banks are supposed to be comfortably, or sectors that banks are supposed to comfortably service. But because of the shortcoming of probably sitting in the comfort zone and expecting customers to move to the bank to ask for services and so on and so forth, these niche players identified those opportunities, especially with the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009. They realized that things can be done in a different way and we still end up satisfying those customers that are out there wanting to enjoy banking services as required. Next slide, please. So this now pushes us to the question of, is it right for us to say bye-bye banks? Or is it a wake-up call? For me, I take it as a wake-up call because we cannot say that banks will sit there and accept that fintech players or digital players come and eat completely their breakfast or lunch. No, they need to wake up, try to understand what these fintech players are doing, how they're leveraging technology, what is the business model they are using, what are the regulators doing to allow them to operate, and how can we capitalize on that to move to the next level of our business to make sure that the customer who is there asking for services, we're able to address it as much as the fintech players are doing, or better than the fintech players. So, bye-bye bank is a wake-up call. So it's not like traditional banks will disappear, no. You need to realize what is happening in the market and how can I set up my organization in the way that I will compete with these players or act as a complement to the services that they are providing. Next slide, please. So this brings us then to the notion of platform banking. We've heard people talk about platform and the rest. Platform banking, because banks today must not live on deposit, loans, and whatever. They need to go beyond that and develop an ecosystem that different connect services will be offered through the bank. Somebody wants to buy a ticket, he should be able to get a good proposal from his bank. He wants to reserve a hotel, he should be able to get a good proposal from his bank. And as banks deliver those services, they too will be able to earn revenue other than charging interest rates, heavy interest rate from customers, or maybe charging huge rates on maintaining bank accounts and so on. So platform economic becomes the right way to pursue banking, just as we have seen from other service providers who have developed platform economic business. We've seen how they've progressed in their businesses and have penetrated the market as fast as possible. So banks therefore should look at banking services as providing advice, okay, being a facilitator, and also being an aggregator of value. So how do we then develop this platform economics, or how do we agile move to delivering those type of services? Next slide, please. So therefore, we need to look at our costs. We understand today that providing banking services leveraging on IT in Africa is still very costly because most of this infrastructure, we buy them, we don't develop them ourselves. And therefore, it costs a lot of money for us to be able to build and deliver this type of services. So we look at the investment over the years projected in terms of investment in retail banking. You will see that the world is evolving towards 295 billion investment by 2021 in IT services. Meanwhile, Africa is still lagging behind at about $4.3 billion. So the question is, why do we lag behind? Is it that we do not necessarily see the opportunity, or is it that we don't know how to go about it? So these are questions we need to ask and sit down and now decide on the best possible mode that we should be able to, we can be able to approach this. If you look at the cost to asset ratio in Africa, for instance, for IT, we are gravitating around 0.46%, while banks in the developed world are around 0.04%. So there is a lot to be done. And once we approach it in the right way, you will be surprised to see that this cost of ownership, this cost-income ratio that we find so high in Africa, up to about 80%, would drop drastically to maybe less than 50%. Next slide, please. So how then do we leverage this technology possibility? You need to have a digital roadmap in mind. Where do I want to go? Who is my customer? How do I design my IT system? How do I design my business processes and so on? So to do this, you must identify the key actors. And the first that you need to think about is you as a bank yourself, internally, your workers, your processes, your business. What is it there that I can digitalize? What is it there that I cannot digitalize? You define all that clearly. You also decide, how do I want to interact with my customers? Is it through digital channels? What type of digital channels do I want to put in place? You define all that. You ask yourself also, what are the underpinning infrastructure that I need to put in place to be able to transform digitally? Those include your network, your cloud, your data center, your service management, and different types of technology choices that have been presented here since yesterday, which you can comfortably sit down and choose those that can be able to address that digital transformation that you want to pursue. Next slide, please. When you think about transforming, going to the cloud, you have to think about architecture. What is the type of architecture that I can put in place that can never go to cloud? It has to be open. It has to be modular. You have to think about how you connect with your end customers, which is at the presentation layer. You have the different channels. And obviously, you need to go think about the middle layer. How do I connect? The security, the integration, the orchestration, the connection with APIs, which is very key. You have to be open. And of course, how does the different layers interact with the core banking application or the financial system? So all this must be clearly identified and structured in a way that when you are going to the cloud, each of these different services, be it from the different partners, you can see the examples there. How do they connect to your banking platform to be able to allow you transform digitally? Next slide, please. This slide is simply a call on APIs. APIs are key, both internal and external. You should be able to be ready to interact with different parties or ecosystem within the digital transformation landscape. Next, please. This then brings me to the key concept of today, which is cloud. So when you think about cloud, what model, what service model do I need to adopt? Do I need to go big bang, build my own infrastructure, put everything, and announce that I'm using cloud? Or do I sit down and analyze what exists traditionally? What are the different options? Is it co-location? Is it hosting? Is it infrastructure as a service? Is it platform as a service? Or is it software as a service? Well, we are lucky to have software providers here like Software Group who can explain to us the advantages of a service model based on software as a service. It's elastic. You simply subscribe for what you need. If you're a bank with probably 100,000 customers, why do you buy a software that is meant to run 1 million customers? Simply subscribe for what you need, and you get your service activated quickly and go. If it's, sorry, go back, yeah. If it is about deploying applications, you don't need to create a development platform for yourself. There's cloud service providers that can provide you with platform that you can simply go there, develop the necessary application, use all the necessary libraries, use the databases, and so on and so forth, and be able to test your application on those platforms before you run them on production. So these are the options that are there. It probably makes sense for you in your digital transformation strategy to look at these different models and choose which one is best suited for the type of your business and the budget that you have. The next slide is on the deployment model. Okay? There is private cloud, there is public, there is hybrid, and there is community. Public is in the sense that instead of, trying to have those services delivered in-house, you simply subscribe to a public service provider, cloud service provider like Amazon Web Services or Microsoft and so on, and probably run the services on a subscription mode from those providers and be able to run your business as expected. Of course, there is the notion of security and so on and so forth that we're going to see on the next slide. Then private, if you are large enough and you have the necessary infrastructure or means to support your own data center to service other connected organizations within your organization, yes, you can build your own private cloud. But you can also go hybrid. Hybrid in the sense that part of your services can be hosted in a public cloud and another part hosted locally on your own data center. Typically, this is guided on business criticality. You know, applications or data that are not too sensitive are normally moved to a public cloud, and those that are very sensitive, like core banking, where the regulation does not allow you to, you know, store data out of the environment in which you are doing business, those can stay in-house. And of course, community-based is when we have a group of financial organizations who decide to come together, like microfinance companies, and create their own private cloud that is meant to service their own specific products and services. They too, they can be able to leverage and manage costs more effectively. But the critical element of going to cloud that I want to drive home today also is cost. When you look at an on-prem infrastructure, you can see that there are a lot of hidden costs that are found within that kind of organization. You have costs of customization, hardware, software, training, maintenance, and a lot of ongoing costs. Whereas on the cloud model, what you need to do is subscribe for a specific service, not necessarily product, service. You pay one-off for customization, and the rest is simply your subscription fee, some training, configuration, and administration. And there you go, and you get your service activated, faster time to market, lower cost of IT personnel, business continuity is assured, and of course, changing from CapEx model to OpEx model to be able to run your banking service. Next. So this brings us to a question that we kind of administered in the market when we're conducting some research on banking, or cloud banking, and we realized that one of the main points that customers, you know, gave us, something that can push them to go to the cloud, was flexibility. Very important. A cloud service provider gives you flexibility to expand or contract depending on whatever situation your business is facing. There is reduced provisioning time with no time to market. It takes, from what we saw presented, a loan process that used to take maybe 5 weeks or so, reduced to 2 days. It stands to the power of a software that exists in the cloud that can be easily customized to specific needs. And you can see all the different answers classified in terms of priority. But the key thing is that the customer now becomes the main focus of the bank, not the product. So once you have that notion in mind, you will design the type of IT infrastructure that will be flexible enough for you to be able to deliver customer-centric solutions. Next, please. And of course, I said there are some considerations that you must have in mind when going to the cloud. When you're building your cloud strategy, you think about access. How do we access the cloud? Of course, we know that the internet is one of the main tools, or the one main medium that we can use to approach the cloud easily in terms of access to services and so on. But the question in Africa is, a lot has been done, yes. There's been an evolution. We have moved from, I would say, the dark 15 years ago to whatever you can call today, looking at the way the network has evolved. But we still believe that there's still a lot to be done. Most of these services are concentrated in urban areas. And as we see clearly, most of the need in Africa is found in the rural area. So how do we deploy a cloud service that can be accessed from any rural area? I think that's the challenge. We've heard about the evolution of 5G, but if you see from the presentation, 5G coverage might be able to reach 2.6% in Africa by the year 2025. So do we have to sit and wait for that? Meanwhile, the customers are there yearning and dying for financial services. So we need to rethink, how do we want to provide cloud services in terms of connectivity. And in some countries, connectivity is still very, very expensive. We have a representative from Equatorial Guinea who said it's very costly to have internet access in Equatorial Guinea, and it's true. My studies confirm that in Equatorial Guinea you may pay up to $60 for 1 gig of data. In Zimbabwe it's $75 for a gig of data. We're lucky in Cameroon that is lower, or in Rwanda, but it's the reality of Africa. So there is that disparity which we believe that regulators and the people that be should be able to find the right solution to make this more accessible. Because cloud, as we say, is one of the easiest ways to leapfrog. But you can't leapfrog without this basic infrastructure that we've just mentioned, we're talking about, which include connectivity and cost effectiveness. Next slide, please. So this simply shows us the disparity in terms of connectivity in Africa. In some countries, we have $20, $60 per giga and so on. But more importantly, that we need to also consider is the ICT Development Index. The ICT Development Index looks at access, usage, and skill. Africa is growing in terms of access, in terms of skills, and in terms of the infrastructure. But it's not still where it's supposed to be. Because when we do a comparative analysis between the world, we see that on a scoring of 10, we're still at 2.62, 6.2. Meanwhile, the world is already at 17.5. No, Europe is at 17.5 and the world is at 5.1. So there's still much to improve. We are moving, but a lot still has to be done if we really want to reduce this cost-income ratio and democratization of banking services in Africa. We need to work. Broadband access is there. We're enjoying internet access in Douala, in Yaoundé, and so on. But what about the rural areas? They need it also. But the infrastructure is not there. We're still at less than 1%, while the world is at 11.2. So we need to work. Unfortunately, the regulator is not here, but I wanted him to see that while we are ready, but there's still a lot of things that we need to do to really make that readiness effective. It's not just about talking, but it's getting it done. The next slide, please. So the next slide is another consideration. I talked about network consideration. The next one is security. It's very, very important to know who is manipulating your data, who is seeing your data, who has access to your data. And we see that the financial services sector is one of those sectors that is very juicy in terms of, people looking for all possible means to have access to data and to steal money or to steal data and resell and so on. So security becomes a major consideration when you think about going to the cloud. How am I going to make sure that only the rightful people who are supposed to see my data and use my data are supposed to have access? So you need to build the necessary security mechanism and be sure that when I'm in the cloud, my data is secured. Next consideration is that of, I talked about security, maybe just to round up a few points. Security also in the cloud can be seen from two perspectives. There is a negative side and there's a positive side. The negative side is that you worry about who has access. Another point, which is very critical, is what control do I have over my infrastructure when I go to the cloud? In most cases, if it's public cloud, you have very limited control. So therefore, it's a worrying, it stands as a worrying aspect for some banks to say, okay, I want to keep controlling my infrastructure. So maybe I should be very careful when I think about going to the cloud. Log in into a particular service provider. You need to do your due diligence properly because you might subscribe for a service from a third-party provider and find out that it's difficult for you maybe to walk away after 2 or 3 years, or maybe to even revert to an on-prem solution. So you need to properly do your studies and make sure that you are able to make the right decision. And of course, one of the disadvantages too is that a cloud environment is also vulnerable to attack because they run on the internet and they are API based, and therefore it's very possible for very ill-intent guys to find a way to be able to connect into your system and perform malicious action. One of the points also is data deletion. When you subscribe to a cloud service, there's a high probability that your data is stored on different servers around the world. And therefore, if there's some data that you want to destroy, there's a high probability that if you are not very vigilant, you might destroy it on one server while it's still existing on another server somewhere. And therefore, this data may be used later on by whoever to do whatever they want to do to have competitive edge about you, against you. So you need to be very careful. But on the positive side, when you subscribe to a cloud service, serious cloud service providers have very solid security system around the platform. Very solid because they have the necessary means in terms of financial capacity to invest on the right infrastructure. They also have the necessary know-how, skilled people to run those platforms, and they can, from time to time, evaluate the infrastructure, and provide all the necessary updates that are required to keep the system up and running at every time. And then the notion of migration. Okay, the movement to cloud is complex. It's not just straightforward. You need to prepare. It's not everything that you can pick and drop. You have to plan. It's complex. Servers sometimes need to be compatible. You need to have the right strategy. And of course, the maturity level of your organization also need to be tested and proven. You don't just wake up and move to the cloud. You need to grow and become mature at a certain point for you to be able to effectively benefit from the cloud offering. More importantly, moving to the cloud is not a revolution. It is not. It's an evolution. It must be evolutive, step by step. You don't get up one day and start running core banking in the cloud when you have not prepared for it. Okay? I've been notified that my time is up. I think I'm almost at the end. Last slide, please. So, regulators, there are a lot of things to do, and we believe they are working. Data privacy law needs to be well crafted and implemented. Data security, very important. Cyber crime laws are needed. Data sovereignty law, also very important. And of course, vendor risks and intellectual property right also is very, very important. And I would like to round up by saying that, move to the last, please. A lot has been done in terms of regulation. You can see somehow the regulatory map in Africa. We have some countries that have.
Sorry, it's not fair what I'm doing, but
last,
is it your last one?
Last.
Because you say last since two.
Last.
Okay.
So it is important regulation. That's why I want to talk about it.
I know
it's key to the
it's
cloud.
because of the other session we have
okay,
some digital players and.
No, it's okay. So a lot has been done, and we still believe that much should be done, so that when we craft our cloud strategy to improve costs and so on, we need to take into consideration what the law is allowing and what the law is not allowing. So I would like to thank you very much for giving me your time, and I believe I've been able to pass some message, and we probably can discuss after this if you have specific questions. There were a lot of questions that were addressed on regulation. If the guys are here, maybe we can discuss after this. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you very much, Mr. Tita Sama. Thank you. If you have questions, exactly as he said, we will have, on va avoir un petit break pour manger. C'est l'occasion idéale parce que là, on a 2 sessions et malheureusement, on a une personne qui